What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Listen to the podcast available on all podcasting platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts from. You can find the JT Sports Podcast. Follow us on all of our social media platforms. If you have a question that you would like answered on a future episode, you can send them in the DMs on Instagram at JTSports_ or on Twitter at JTSports__. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about Pat Narduzzi calling out Coach Prime, Tua Tagovailoa's big game struggles, and why Bryce Young will lead the Panthers to the playoffs this upcoming season. Pitt head coach Pat Narduzzi took some shots at Coach Prime for how he's gone about utilizing the transfer portal to overhaul Colorado's roster. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, the NCAA has a rule that allows first-year head coaches to remove players off the roster as long as they remain on scholarship. Now, at the ACC spring meeting, Pat Narduzzi told 247 Sports that that's not what the rule intended to be. It was not to overhaul your roster. We'll see how it works out, but that to me looks bad on college football coaches across the country. The reflection is on one guy right now, but when you look at it overall, those kids that have moms and dads and brothers and sisters and goals in life, I don't know how many of those 70 that left really wanted to leave or they were kicked in the butt to get out. He also continued by saying, I grew up in a profession that you can't tell a guy that he has to leave based on athletic ability. I think he'll be shocked that he probably had some pretty good football players in that room. When I got to Pitt back in 2015, I didn't kick anybody off. Zero. Those are your guys. When you become a head coach, you inherit that team and you coach that team. If someone wants to leave, that's great. You don't kick them out. I disagree with the whole process. That's not why I got in the game. Now, Pat Narduzzi, he makes a pretty fair point, okay? I do feel like Deion Sanders kind of could have handled this situation a lot better. I do feel like it is a little bit unfair to some of the Colorado players who were there before he arrived, that he kind of pushed them out. But you got to remember that this is the same team that only won one game last season. And when Deion Sanders arrived and he gave that first team meeting speech, he told those guys that he was coming in this thing to win. He wasn't trying to wait 3 to 4 years to do things the old-fashioned way, like what Pat Narduzzi is talking about. Like, Deion Sanders is trying to come into this upcoming college football season and change Colorado football. Colorado has only had one winning season in the last 18 years, and that came in 2016. Deion Sanders is trying to get some immediate results, and most of the players that he had last year were not that good. He probably did have about 3 or 4 good players on his roster that he probably pushed away, but you don't know if he pushed those guys away because he cut them. Maybe those guys just wanted a change of scenery. Maybe they didn't like Colorado. Maybe they didn't think that Deion Sanders was the right coach for them. And for Pat Narduzzi, you know, even though he does make a fair point, he has to understand that college football has changed. This isn't 2015. This is the year 2023. These head coaches, when they get hired by most of these Power 5 programs, they don't have several years to overhaul and rebuild a roster. Most of these coaches have to come in and they have to hit the ground running right away. And when you look at Deion Sanders, I think that he's rebuilding this program in the best way that he sees fit that has success right away. And I don't think that Deion Sanders is only going to win 3 games. I definitely think that he should at least be able to get Colorado to a bowl game. But even if Colorado only wins 3 or 4 games this year, at least he's going to be able to say that he did it with his guys, his way. There's more to one way than being able to build up a program. Pat Narduzzi is somebody who has been very vocal about the transfer portal and NIL. This is somebody who accused Utah of using NIL to flip one of his recruits. He also tried to say that there were schools out there who were trying to use NIL to tamper with getting Drake May to leave UNC. He also accused USC of tampering when Jordan Addison decided to transfer from Pitt to USC to play with Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley. Pat Narduzzi, he does have a fair point, but at the same time, he has to remember that these head coaches don't have a lot of years to just sit back and try to overhaul a roster the old-fashioned way by inheriting a one-win team, trying to develop those players, trying to get 3 or 4 recruiting classes in there, trying to get a couple of players from the transfer portal here and there. Like, no, Deion Sanders came in this thing to win, and he's trying to win right away. Lincoln Riley, when he arrived at USC last year, he hit the transfer portal pretty hard. Now, albeit he probably didn't push guys out in the same way that Deion Sanders did, but you got to make room for better players. And Deion Sanders got to Colorado, and he saw that most of the players that he had on his roster could have been easily replaceable. So he went in the transfer portal, and he got upgrades. The transfer portal is a way to fill holes that you have on your roster. And for Colorado, every position was an area of need. So what did Deion Sanders do? He went in the portal, he got his son, he got Travis Hunter, he got a bunch of other good players as well. And those guys are going to have big impacts on Colorado's season this year. The guys that Deion Sanders has on his team now are way better than the players that Colorado had last year when they only won 1 game. This was the worst college football team in the sport last season. Why would Deion Sanders want to keep the majority of that roster? He didn't want to inherit a one-win team and have to be stuck with these players. Like, no, he kicked most of those players to the curb, and I'm pretty sure some of those players left on their own free will, but Deion Sanders is all about results. Last year's Colorado team didn't produce any good results, and his football program hasn't produced any meaningful results in damn near 2 decades. Did you see Colorado's spring game? It was sold out. It was the most watched spring game of the whole entire spring. Colorado fans are starving for some success, and Deion Sanders is going to give it to them. You can say, well, JT, it's not right for him to just come in there and force guys out. Yeah, it's not fair, but guess what? Life isn't fair. It isn't fair that some of you guys have to wake up every day and work a 9 to 5, but that's just life. Those players, they weren't good enough in Deion Sanders' eyes, so he came in there, he pushed them out, and he made way for players who he felt were better. In college football, in today's age, you don't have a lot of time to do things the old-fashioned way. And if Pat Narduzzi is going to take shots at anybody, don't take shots at Deion Sanders. Take shots at the guys in the black-white suit and ties who are responsible for allowing this to happen because they allowed this rule to be set in place. Why are we getting mad at Deion Sanders for finding loopholes in rules that the NCAA allowed? The NCAA is responsible for the majority of problems that we have in college football right now. The whole NIL situation, the transfer portal situation, this is all of the NCAA's fault. Why are we getting mad at coaches for finding loopholes in the rules that the NCAA created? Deion Sanders ain't make the rules. He's just trying to find a way to win. And we already know that Pat Narduzzi is super outspoken. We already know that he's not the only coach who feels this way, but check this out. If you're Pat Narduzzi and you don't like it, you better hope that Deion Sanders doesn't have a good season this year, because if Colorado ends up hitting the ground running, this isn't going to be the first or last head coach who takes this approach. You guys already know that this is a copycat league. So if Deion Sanders ends up having a lot of success year 1, guess what the next batch of new head coaches are going to do next year when they get hired? They're going to rinse, wash, and repeat Deion Sanders' formula. They're going to get to their new program. They're going to push a lot of guys out. They're going to hit the transfer portal and bring those new guys in. That's just how it goes. Deion Sanders is trying to win. He's not trying to wait 5 to 6 years and having to inherit a team that only won 1 game. This man's trying to give the city of Boulder, the Colorado fan base, a reason to be excited. And he's done that. He's rejuvenated this program, and they haven't even played a game yet. And so what if they only win 2 or 3 games? At least Deion Sanders can say, I won 2 or 3 games with my team, and I was able to do this thing my way. It's not a right or wrong approach to building a contender in college football. There are multiple ways to build a championship caliber football program in college football. Every coach has a different philosophy. Pat Narduzzi's philosophy is different from Deion Sanders' philosophy. And that's okay, as long as you're producing and you're getting results. Tua Tagovailoa last year, in the 8 non-primetime games that he played, he completed 70% of his passes. He threw 20 touchdowns to only 4 interceptions and threw for 2,488 passing yards. But anytime the Miami Dolphins played in primetime, he struggled. He completed 54% of his passes for 1,060 passing yards, 5 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. And his worst games were against the 49ers, the Chargers, the Bills the second time they played, and the Green Bay Packers. Against Green Bay, he threw the game away. He threw 3 interceptions, and he only threw 1 touchdown. Against the LA Chargers, the whole entire offense pretty much got clamped. The only touchdown he threw was the Tyreek Hill. If Tua Tagovailoa is going to end up being the quarterback who can get the Miami Dolphins to the Super Bowl, he has to be better in primetime games against quality teams. Last year, the best performance he had against a playoff team was earlier in the season against the Baltimore Ravens when he threw 6 touchdowns. Tua Tagovailoa hasn't really been known as being a quarterback who elevates his game in big moments. Even going back to early in his career, when they had Brian Flores as the head coach, in big moments of games, they took Tua out and they put in Ryan Fitzmagic. Tua still has a lot of improvement that he needs to make if we're going to consider the Miami Dolphins Super Bowl contenders. Right now, the Dolphins are a playoff caliber football team, but I can't say this team is equipped to win a Super Bowl when you have a quarterback who every time he gets in the limelight, who melts. Tua has to be better in these big games. And you can make all the excuses you want to if you're a Dolphins fan. If you want to blame the offensive line, okay, but your offensive line still hasn't really been all that much improved over the course of this offseason. You can make all the excuses. You can put the blame on Mike McDaniel, whoever, but eventually you're going to have to look at Tua and you're going to have to ask yourself, hey, is this the guy who can get us to the next level? And I was somebody who was a big defender of Tua Tagovailoa, and I still defend Tua a lot. But after watching last year what Tua did against playoff caliber football teams in the second half of the season, I started to understand why the Miami Dolphins were kind of flirting with the idea of trading for Deshaun Watson or upgrading at quarterback. Tua Tagovailoa may be another version of Kirk Cousins. He's good when you're not watching him in prime time, but when the lights get bright and the stage gets big and palms get sweaty and chests get tight, he folds. I can't remember too many times when Tua Tagovailoa actually came big in big moments of games that actually mattered. I would have loved to see him in the wild card game when they lost to the Buffalo Bills. At least Skylar Thompson put the Dolphins in a position to win that game, albeit it was because the defense carried. But Skylar Thompson still made enough plays for the Dolphins to have a shot at winning that game. And if Tua would have played, maybe the Dolphins potentially could have beaten the Buffalo Bills in the first round, but you never know. Because every time Tua played in the primetime game last year, he didn't really show up. Against the LA Chargers, he completed 35.7% of his passes. He was 10 out of 28 passing for 145 passing yards. He was averaging 5.2 yards per pass. Now, Mike McDaniel does deserve a good amount of the game for the Miami Dolphins' shortcomings in those losses. They got one-dimensional, they couldn't run the football, and there's been plenty of occasions last year where you can go back and watch the Miami Dolphins and you can say, bro, what the hell happened to the run game? What the hell happened to playing complementary style football? It just seemed like at times Mike McDaniel just got trigger happy and he just wanted to throw the football 50, 40 times a game. It's like, you ever play Madden and you play somebody online and they stop the run game early and then you just say, F it, I'm going to just throw the football, I'm going to just air it out. That's kind of what the Miami Dolphins did at times last year. And when you go back and you look at most of their losses, they didn't really put a lot of emphasis on trying to get the run game going. And it's not like they didn't have talent at running back. Like Raheem Mostert, when they had him going, he was a pretty good running back, especially after contact. But it just seems like at times, Mike McDaniel, even though he comes from that Kyle Shanahan coaching tree, seems to forget that you can call run plays. And it's a little bit odd because, a staple of that Kyle Shanahan offense is running the football. So for Mike McDaniel this year, when the Miami Dolphins have to play the New York Jets in prime time, when they got to play the Buffalo Bills, or hell, even the New England Patriots, like, he's going to have to find a way to be more balanced on offense. And I'm not going to put all of Tua's struggles on him because coaching does play a part in this. A good head coach puts his players in situations to succeed. And oftentimes, when you watch the Miami Dolphins play last year, they never really had a counterpunch. They were a one-trick pony at times. If you could stop them from generating all of the big explosive plays with Tyreek and Jalen Waddle, you pretty much cracked the code to their offense. Go and look at the Miami Dolphins 2022 player stats for last year. You go and you look at the stats, Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill made up the majority of the passing yardage. You got to be able to be less predictable. Everybody knew where the ball was going to the majority of the times when the Miami Dolphins decided to air it out. It was either going to one or two players, Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill. And that was it. His offense got really predictable, and I think that was a large reason why the Miami Dolphins, after the second half of the season, started to crash back down to earth. I even made a video after they lost to the LA Chargers. I said, what the hell happened to the Miami Dolphins offense? At one point last season, Tua Tagovailoa was an MVP candidate. And then the second half of the year, dude just completely fell off the rails. The offensive line doesn't look like it's going to make too many giant leaps in improvement. Maybe the coaching staff is really sold on the fact that they can coach these guys up and get them playing at a better level and they can develop them. So if the coaches feel that way, then you can't really use the offensive line as an excuse because the coaching staff has enough confidence that they feel that they can get this offensive line playing at a good enough level that they can win a Super Bowl. They went out and traded for Jalen Ramsey when they could have went out and acquired the offensive lineman. They could have got Jonah Williams. He was the left tackle for the Cincinnati Bengals last year. He's moving to right tackle this year. According to some reports out there, he was on the trade block. And yet there were no rumors about the Miami Dolphins reaching out to acquire him. For Tua Tagovailoa, he has to be able to perform better in these big primetime games. Eventually, if Tua is going to be viewed as the legitimate franchise quarterback for this franchise, he has to be able to perform better when the lights are the brightest, because that's what separates the great quarterbacks in this game versus the average quarterbacks in this game. When you think about Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson even, the best quarterbacks in this league, what do they all have in common? They step up in big games. Meanwhile, when you look at the quarterbacks who we consider to be average, such as Kirk Cousins and Dak Prescott, what do they do in big games? Oftentimes, they come up short. And Tua, I kind of think he fits in that Kirk Cousins, Dak Prescott category. And if you want to say, well, JT, Tua was a top 10 quarterback last year, I mean, okay, but he's still in that same category. I mean, the dude didn't really have too many good big games against quality playoff caliber football teams outside of the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills early in the season. Late in the season, when people started to crack the code to this Miami Dolphins offense, Tua got bottled up and he shriveled, and he ended up coming up small when he needed to come up big in big moments. Against the Green Bay Packers, like, the dude low-key sold the game for the Miami Dolphins. He was AKA Tua turning the ball over. Same thing against the Buffalo Bills. Like, Tua was a top 5, top 10 pick when he ended up getting drafted in the same class as Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. And if you were to ask Mike McDaniel, who would he rather have, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, or Tua, I'm pretty sure he would take those other two quarterbacks over Tua in a heartbeat, because those two quarterbacks have been able to step up in big moments. And you can say, well, Justin Herbert folded against the Jacksonville Jaguars in the playoffs. Okay, but for the most part, he carried the Chargers to the postseason because they were banged up for the majority of the 2022 season. Tua has to be better in these big-time games. This dude has been incredibly underwhelming anytime he gets put in primetime matchups. Against the 49ers, I understood they had one of the best defenses in the NFL, but I don't really think anybody expected Tua to have the kind of performance that he put on display. Against the LA Chargers, the dude only completed 10 out of 28 passes. He was averaging 5.2 yards per pass. Like, the Miami Dolphins have to develop a counterpunch. You ever played UFC and you ever went against one of your homeboys who doesn't really know how to do anything but just button mash? That's kind of what the Miami Dolphins did at times. Like, anytime they got in a pinch, they kept on doing the same thing. Every time they were down at halftime, they came out and never really looked like they made any adjustments. Tua Tagovailoa has to be better in big games, but also Mike McDaniel and his coaching staff have to be better at making adjustments. They were too one-dimensional at times last season. No run game, and they were too overly reliant on Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle to run their offense through. And I'm not trying to say this to hate on Tua. I'm not a Tua hater. You guys know I love Tua. I've been going to bat for Tua ever since he first got drafted by the Dolphins. But I am starting to realize a lot of the knocks that people had on Tua, and it's starting to come to fruition. And I saw this stat on Twitter, of all places. I never thought that I would see some reasonable statistics against Tua on Twitter. Like, Twitter is one of the worst places to find good arguments. But this was a pretty good one that somebody threw at me when I was trying to come to the defense of Tua Tagovailoa. They was like, man, have you seen what Tua does in big games, JT? The dude in big games has 5 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. And in non-primetime games, he has 20 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. What does that tell you about Tua? That was a pretty good point. So I'm hoping that Tua and the Miami Dolphins offense perform a lot better in primetime games this year. Because last year, anytime they played in a big game, they melted. I want to talk about why my guy Bryce Young is going to take the Panthers to the playoffs. And I know I came out a couple of weeks ago and I made a video talking about how small the guy looked and how he looked like a damn 5th grader at the Carolina Panthers rookie minicamp. But a lot of you guys kind of forgot that he was my number 1 ranked quarterback, and I was hyping this dude up for the whole entire draft process. And if you go back and you look at what Bryce Young did last season at Alabama, he carried that Alabama squad. That wasn't the Alabama squad that you're normally accustomed to seeing, with tons of first-round talent at wide receiver and great offensive line play. Like, even Nick Saban would tell you right now that Bryce Young was the sole reason why Alabama's season didn't go off the rails. Because if Alabama didn't have Bryce Young last year, they probably would have had 3 or 4 losses. Heck, look at what Alabama is doing right now. Did you not see their spring game? Their quarterback play was not that great, And it was to the point where Nick Saban had to go into the transfer portal to get another quarterback. So that tells you about how big of an impact that Bryce Young had on Alabama. If you can carry Alabama in the SEC, the toughest conference in college football, I'm pretty sure that you're going to be able to succeed in the NFL. There's a lot of people talking about I got to wait to see him play a game. Like, come on, bro. Like, why do y'all act like this? Some players you can just look at and tell they're just him. When Joe Burrow came out of LSU, you knew he was going to be that guy. Certain players you can just look at and tell they're going to be him. Unless they just go to a terrible organization and get held back by awful coaching. But that's not the situation that Bryce Young is walking into. Frank Reich is one of the better quarterback coaches in this league. Yeah, I know last year at Indianapolis when he got fired, it didn't work out with Matt Ryan and Sam Ehlinger. But prior to that, the quarterbacks that he's had have all had pretty efficient seasons under him. Like Carson Wentz, even though the coach traded him after the year, had his most efficient season of his career under Frank Reich. Same thing when he had to start Jacoby Brissett the year when Andrew Luck retired in the preseason. Phillip Rivers had a really efficient season under Frank Reich. And you already know that Phillip Rivers throughout the majority of his career was known as being a turnover machine. But under Frank Reich, he was playing at a pretty efficient level. Bryce Young went to probably the best landing spot possible for him to have a successful NFL career. And going into his rookie season, I'm expecting big things out of Bryce Young. It was a Carolina Panther fan that tried to tell me, man, you expecting too much out of Bryce Young. It's just his first season. Like, what? You telling me I can't expect the number 1 overall pick to lead the Carolina Panthers to the damn playoffs in one of the weakest divisions in the NFL? The Panthers went 7-10 last year with Baker Mayfield, who they released during the early part of the season, PJ Walker, and Sam freaking Darnold, and the freaking interim head coach and Steve Wilkes. And they nearly won the division. So if they can go 7-10, having multiple different quarterbacks starting with the interim head coach, how is it crazy to believe that Bryce Young can get the Panthers back to the postseason this year? And it has been a long time since we last saw the Carolina Panthers in the postseason. But a large reason for that was because, one, they whiffed on hiring Matt Rule as their head coach, and two, they haven't really had stability at the quarterback position. Bryce Young now has stabilized the most important position in the NFL. And you now have a head coach who isn't learning on the job. This isn't his first go around in the NFL. Like, Frank Reich was a pretty solid head coach during his time at Indianapolis. Now, was bruh a top 5 or top 10 coach? No, he wasn't. But he did a pretty good job during his time with the Colts, considering the fact that they were playing musical chairs at the quarterback position nearly every year. They had a new quarterback almost every single season after Andrew Luck retired. Jacoby Brissett, Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan. I mean, come on. I'm glad that Frank Reich and the Carolina Panthers organization took it upon themselves to say, you know what? We're not even going to allow you to do what you did in Indianapolis, bringing in all these different quarterbacks. We're going to go ahead, trade up for Bryce Young, and we're going to give you some stability at QB. And this is a really talented team. This is probably the most talented team in this division behind the New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints have a really talented roster, but I don't really trust Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen hasn't really proven me anything. He has a good team, but he hasn't proven to be a solid coach, capable of being able to get a team to the postseason. They mismanaged their quarterback situation. Many Saints fans will tell you that Jameis Winston should have been starting all of last year when he was healthy. But instead, they went with Andy Dalton. You got the Atlanta Falcons who do show a lot of promise, but do you really believe in Desmond Ridder? If you're a Falcons fan listening to this right now, who would you rather have, Bryce Young or Desmond Ridder? And don't give me that crap, man, Bryce Young ain't play a single NFL game. You don't know if he's going to be better than Desmond Ridder. Bruh, what the hell has Desmond Ridder showed you to give you any hope that this guy is going to end up being able to get you to the postseason, because Desmond Ridder did not look that good last season. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you're really going to put your faith in Todd Bowles? This is the same person who folded a multiple possession lead against the Cincinnati Bengals. This dude went for a fake punt on his own side of the field, and it failed. You're really going to put your faith in Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield? Like, the Carolina Panthers right now are probably the safest team if you're somebody who bets money on preseason over-under win totals or who's going to end up making it to the playoffs. The Panthers are probably the safest bet to make it to the postseason and to win this division. You got a pretty solid head coach. I probably would say that this is the best head coach in the division. He's the only head coach in this division that actually has been able to lead a team to the playoffs. Not just that, but you look at the offensive line. This offensive line was really good last season. They were 9th in the NFL in sacks per game allowed, and they were one of the best run blocking units in the whole entire National Football League. They got plenty talent and depth at wide receiver. Yeah, you had to trade DJ Moore, and, there were a lot of tears that were shed amongst Panther fans, but you were able to bring in Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, Terrace Marshall. Did we forget about him? Terrace Marshall has a lot of potential, and I think he's going to end up having a breakout season this year. You got Laviska Shenault. You got rookie out of Ole Miss, Jonathan Mingo, who Steve Smith was really high on. Your tight end position is pretty good. Hayden Hurst, Ian Thomas. You got running back Miles Sanders, Chuba Hubbard. And you already know that this defense is going to be top-notch with Coach E at the helm at defensive coordinator. Did you not see the Denver Broncos defense last year? The Denver Broncos defense with Coach E as the defensive coordinator was the only thing good about watching the Broncos last year. And even then, his defense didn't get too many breaks because the offense couldn't sustain drives. And every time the defense got to stop, and every time they got done hitting a sip of that Gatorade, 30 seconds later, they were right back on the field. The Carolina Panthers, man, there's no reason why this team should not make it to the playoffs last year. I know that I predicted Carolina to make it to the postseason last year, but I didn't know that Matt Rule was just going to completely be a whiff of a head coach and that Baker Mayfield was just going to be crappy. This team should be a playoff team this year. I would be incredibly surprised if Carolina does not make it to the postseason this year. Frank Wright is the best head coach in this division. He does a really good job getting the most out of his quarterback. And plus, this is the best coaching staff in this division also. He has a really good staff in place to make sure that Bryce Young is able to play at a really high level this year. And I think that Bryce Young is one of the best quarterback prospects to come out in this past decade. Now, I don't think he's better than Trevor Lawrence, but I definitely think he's up there. Same thing with CJ Stroud. The Carolina Panthers, man, with Bryce Young at the helm at QB, as long as he can stay healthy, this team, I expect them to make it to the playoffs as long as he stays healthy. And that's really my only concern about Bryce Young. This guy, despite being undersized and looking like a preschooler, this guy has incredible pocket awareness. He throws with great anticipation, timing, accuracy. And even though he's small, he's not the easiest to bring down. This guy kind of is like Houdini. There were a lot of times last season when it looked like Bryce Young was going to get swallowed behind the line of scrimmage. He'll end up breaking out of a sack and making some crazy shit happen. And most of Alabama's losses last season came when Bryce Young wasn't on the field. Did you watch when they lost to LSU? They lost to LSU off a 2-point conversion. Bryce Young wasn't on the field. Did you remember when Texas took Alabama to the wire and surprised us all? Who saved Alabama in that game? It was Bryce Young. Come on, man. The Carolina Panthers with Bryce Young, I don't care if you're a Falcons fan, a Saints fan, a Buccaneers fan. There's no way you can tell me you watched Alabama play last season and you were not impressed with Bryce Young. Some of y'all kind of blowing me talking about man, I got to see, man. The NFL is a different ball. Come on, man. This dude is a phenomenal quarterback. This dude is one of the best quarterback prospects that ever come out in recent memory. This dude is a generational player. Like, yes, he's undersized, but he walks on water. I remember I was listening to a Colin Cowherd segment when he had Sean Payton on. And Sean Payton and him were discussing who possibly could be taken number 1 overall. And Sean Payton normally said when you're evaluating the quarterback position, you normally want to draft somebody who fits the positional prototype, which is probably like 6'2", 6'3", 215. But sometimes when you have a quarterback who, quote, quote, in Sean Payton's words, walks on water, even though he may not fit that prototypical build, since he walks on water, he can overcome that. And that's Bryce Young. And this team is really good. He's going to have a top 10 defense with Coach E at the helm as defensive coordinator. This is somebody who is getting interviews to be a potential head coach, despite the fact that the Broncos were the biggest disappointment in the NFL last year. That should tell you everything you need to know about how good the Carolina Panthers defensive coordinator is. Now, I'm probably never going to be able to pronounce dude's name just because I'm not really that good with word pronunciation, and plus he has a little bit of a difficult name to pronounce. That's why I just call him Coach E. But this defense is going to be outstanding, and the defense played at a really high level last year under Steve Wilkes. And this was without their second best player on that side of the ball, and J.C. Horn, who missed significant time due to injury. The Carolina Panthers, with Bryce Young at the helm at QB, I believe they're going to be a playoff team. Now, will they win the division? Shoot, I think they will. But even if they don't win the division, let's say somebody surprises us like the Saints or the Falcons do, I still expect the Carolina Panthers to be in the playoffs. There's no reason why this team shouldn't make it to the postseason. They went 7-10 last year. Despite firing Matt Rule, Steve Wilkes comes in, rejuvenates this team, almost puts this team in a situation to win this division. So with Frank Wright, who's a better head coach than what the Carolina Panthers had, and Matt Rule, who actually knows offense, who actually knows how to develop a quarterback, who knows how to get efficient quarterback play, I expect Carolina to be in the postseason. I don't get how some people out there really think this is going to be the worst team in this division. Some of you guys act like Frank Wright is one of the most terrible coaches in the NFL. Like, if you go and you look back at Frank Wright's track record, this guy is phenomenal at getting efficient quarterback play. You can hate on him for what he did with Matt Ryan and Sam Ehlinger, but throw the 2022 season in the trash and go back and look at what he did previously. This guy gets the most out of all of his quarterbacks, and him getting Bryce Young is going to put Carolina in a situation to make it to the postseason. They haven't had a franchise QB since Cam Newton. They're still trying to find his replacement, and they have it now in Bryce Young. I expect the Panthers, as long as Bryce Young stays healthy, to make it to the postseason. This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. If you enjoyed, rate us 5 stars on Apple, Spotify. We would greatly appreciate it. Share this episode of the podcast on all of your social media platforms with your friends, family members, and acquaintances. And I will see you guys shortly with another episode of the JT Sports Podcast.